Hey, Nuts and Bolts with Tony here, guys. Welcome to my channel. Today I have a 2008 F-150 with a 4.6 liter engine, and this thing came in overheating. Came in with pretty much no coolant in it, head gasket blown because the nipple that's on the back of the intake manifold came off. Let's check out what happened to this thing. So these aftermarket intakes, they have the rubber nipple that goes over the back of that port on the back of the intake because some models have a heater hose that attaches there. Well, look right there where the arrow is pointing. You can actually see the rubber cap and that metal piece of wire that's clamped. That's how it comes. Supposed to be clamping that to that nipple. And then it pops off, and then all the coolant exits the chat very quickly, and then it blows the head gasket. So we're going to get started pulling the heads. So here I am removing some of the hoses. I'm not going to show the simple things like what it takes to remove this intake manifold, but I will try to bookmark several of the steps, pulling the heads, torquing, things like that. So here I'm just removing the throttle body. So you'll see in a lot of my videos, I use this little Milwaukee stubby 3/8 impact for just about everything. Even removing ignition coils, just because it's so fast, it has so much torque, and it's just quick. But I definitely don't use it when I put small stuff back together because, well, it'll break it. Now be careful disconnecting your coils, taking your coils out, and a lot of the stuff on these intake manifolds, because if it's aftermarket, then the coils will have screws holding them down. And you want to make sure your ratchet's going in the correct direction or you'll strip it out really easily. I'm using the long neck 3/8 ratchet here because you can't get under the firewall with the Milwaukee one, with the Milwaukee stubby impact. All right, going to try out the OMT disconnect kit here. I got this one here, the green one. We're going to try it out. On this Ford here. So the problem with the plastic ones is that a lot of times when you put the tool in, it doesn't depress the spring or the tab. So this has got like a rubber band on it to kind of help it. So when you do that, it slides in. So now it's in there. It's the right size. So you heard that click. And so now I'm just going to pull the line off, and I'm doing this one-handed, which just tells you how well this metal one works better than the plastic. The plastic does not slip in there like that. Right there, OMT. And they make awesome timing kits. And I got all the bolts out, so intake is gonna pop right out. Now it's time for the front of the engine. This engine has a giant fan clutch. It's the same size nut as a 6.4 and a 6-liter Power Stroke. Next up, got to get the valve covers off. And I haven't done this one in a while, and I forgot that you can't get the valve cover off with the EGR tube. So my EGR tube nut was spinning on the manifold, so it was a little tricky to get off. And once you get the EGR tube out, the valve cover pops right off. Now I'm replacing the water pump in this. I generally do that when I have an overheating issue. And I'm going to use the Milwaukee stubby 3/8 cordless impact for this balancer. Let's see how it goes. Oh, look at that. Zapped it right off. And then you've got to use a puller for the balancer. So here I am with my cordless ratchet. There's not enough room for the stubby impact. So the timing cover bolts are all going to be 19s and 13s. You want to make sure that you draw a little picture of where the bolts go, or get a little bolster mat. Once you're sure you have all the bolts out, try to pop the cover. If the cover does not pop easily, if it does not just pop right out at the top like that, then something is still connected. Every single time I've had a timing cover that didn't want to come off and disconnect, there was one bolt somewhere hiding. So that's what it looks like right there. First thing to come off is the crank sensor pickup right there. So you'll have your engine the right way when your passenger cam is at the 11 o'clock position and your driver's cam will be at the 12 o'clock position. So the first thing to disconnect is going to be your timing chain tensioners. You're going to have one on each side. It's going to be two 13mm bolts in each one. Now just know this, once you take your timing chain tensioner off, if you don't hold your cam is going to jump teeth. So I mark every single timing chain and component when I pull them apart. I'm replacing this timing chain kit, so it doesn't matter that I'm marking it. I'm just marking it so I can make sure that everything lines up. So you're going to take your timing chain tensioner off. That's the first thing. It's going to slip out. It sits in a channel in that slipper. Then you're going to pop your slipper out. The next thing to do is your fixed guide. When you take your fixed guide out, then your chain has all the slack in the world. My cam's already jumped once I release the tension. And then you're going to go to the other side and do the exact same thing. This tensioner is a little harder to get out because it's sandwiched in between the head. And so having a buddy hold the cam makes it much easier. And then you pop the fixed guide out, and then your driver's side chain will come out with the sprocket, with your crankshaft sprocket. To break these head bolts loose, I got my Capri Tools long 1/2-inch ratchet and my Cenex Tools socket and extension from their impact set that I have. After you get all your head bolts out, it's time to pull the head off. It's quite heavy and awkward with the exhaust manifold and the cam on there, so be careful that you don't drop it when you start to lift it up. I had a friend help me. So now it's time to assemble the heads. So the first thing that I do when I get heads back is I clean all the surfaces. So I got the intake surface clean, and we're going to roll it over, and you'll see the exhaust side that I've got it all clean. And now the exhaust manifold gasket surface is clean, and it's time to put the exhaust manifold on. And the manifolds are 18 foot-pounds. So one thing you want to be careful of when you put your head on is the exhaust manifold studs so they don't get stuck in the exhaust pipe. That actually happened when I put this back together on the passenger side, and I had a hard time moving it around. Now I ended up putting Felpro head bolts in this engine, and it required me to locate the head bolt ports that were in coolant passages. So right now is the best time to figure out which ones are in coolant passages and mark them, because you're going to have to put liquid thread sealant on the head bolts that go into the coolant passages. Now don't forget your engine dowels as well. I have mine out for cleaning purposes. Yeah, you're going to have one engine dowel at the top of the front and the rear of the head, and that holds your head gasket in place. So here is the torque procedure for the camshaft carriers. There's 2 different carriers per camshaft, and it's 89 inch-pounds. So here's some of the torque specs you're going to need. Timing cover, exhaust manifold, water pump, that intake. Stay tuned later for an updated intake torque, your thermostat, and your valve cover. So I was trying to hurry up and get this truck off the rack and heads to the machine shop. So what I do when I disassemble heads is I do this. I take the heads and I lay them out a certain way so I know where the front is. So I know that this is the passenger cam. These are all the lifters and rockers in order. This is the cam carriers here. Those are the spark plugs for this head. These are just the locators for the head gasket. There's other one somewhere else. So then I know that this is the driver's side cam. These are all the rockers and push rods. Spark plugs laid out. Rocker cam carrier, same way. Okay, but then I also know that on this head, I have a temp sensor that goes in this head. And I also have this bracket here that goes in this head. I also take apart the timing chain the same exact way. I lay it all out so I know what guides go on what side, what tensioners, because on this one the tensioners are different. So that way you can reference later which one's which. I put the sprockets, how they go. Now here's a tip about these cylinder heads. Pretty sure the cylinder heads are the same part number for both sides. So that's where the timing chain tensioner goes. That top hole's the bolt, that bottom hole's the bolt, and that is the oil feed for the tensioner. That's where the oil comes through to supply oil to the tensioner. Now if you go to the back of the head, it has the exact same little spot. Top bolt, bottom bolt, and a plug. Because this one is plugged off because this is the back of the head. So you have to really pay attention to that. Same thing on the other side of the engine. You go to the back of the head, it's plugged. You go to the front of the head, and you have an oil passage. Right there. Now on the driver's side head, another way that you can tell is that is where the cylinder head temp sensor goes. You can't see it on the camera, but there's red Loctite on those threads in the hole. And there is not red Loctite in that on that head over there in that hole. And the temp sensor has red Loctite on it. Now for putting together the cylinder heads, I use a little can of oil. You can also use assembly lube. So you want to put oil in all of your places where metal is going to contact metal. All of your cam journals. I squirt a little bit around where all the lifters go in. You want every single thing that you put together to have some sort of lube on it, whether it be oil or assembly lube. The reason you want to do that is because you're going to be turning the engine over maybe only a little bit, maybe a lot before the engine starts. And once it starts, it'll have oil pressure, but it won't have any oil until it starts. So here you can see my process. I just put a little dab on each side. You want to make sure that you don't put it in any of the bolt holes. So any of your holes for your cam carriers, you don't want to get oil in those because then you can hydro lock the hole and actually crack your cylinder head. Then I put all the lifters in, and then I oil on top of the lifter and the valves, and then I put all my rockers in, and then I oil on top of the rockers as well. And now this is the cam right here. Now remember, you got to put it in a certain spot. Now here I even put oil on top of the cam journals. So when I put my cam carriers on, it has a little bit of lubricant there. And I'm just gonna snug these bolts down in a crisscross pattern just to get them snugged down. And then I'm gonna come back with a torque wrench and actually torque them. But you want to go evenly because you don't want to pop any of your valve springs off. And then I go with the torque spec right here, and I'm going to torque all my cam carriers, all my bolts, and I do a torque and then I go back and double torque one more time, because when you're torquing something this big with all this spring tension, sometimes you can have a bolt that doesn't quite tighten. And don't forget your cylinder head temp sensor. We're going to go ahead and put that right there on the inside. You can put that later, but it's just easier now. And don't forget to put your bracket on the driver's side cylinder head right there. And as you can see right here, I do the same thing on the other head. The only thing I did different on this head was I laid all the lifters out side by side, and I just squirted oil on all of them at one time. So then when I picked them up, I just rubbed it around the lifter with my fingers before I put it in the hole. So same process here. Gonna snug this down uniformly. And don't forget to put your cam in close to where it needs to be. So for timing, the passenger head needs to be right there, but it's not going to sit there because of spring tension. And so it sits about right there, which is close enough. And you can see the driver's side cam is the same way. This one is supposed to be right there, but it sits there. So it's close enough where when I put it in, it won't do any damage by turning the cam. When you're putting your engine dowels in, make sure it goes right there. I was putting them on the left side and I reached over with my right hand and stuck it in the hole, and I accidentally put it right there, hit it with a hammer, and it went flush. Well, that's coolant passage. So then I had to get it out. Before you put your heads on, you want to make sure that you clean this edge right here, clean the front part as well, because there's going to be a big glob of silicone there. It's easier to clean it there where you have a nice clean surface before you put the head on. So these are Felpro head gaskets, and they're labeled left and right. So left means on a longitudinal engine, when it goes straight with the car, when you're sitting in the driver's seat, the left side is the driver's side. When you're sitting in the driver's seat, left is left. So actually when you're at the front of the car, the right side is actually the left side, and vice versa. I got the headset on yesterday before I went home, so they're on right now. I just have one bolt in each side. So I want to tell you before I forget. So this bolt right here that goes back there for that water pipe. All right, so what I did was I cut about a quarter. I ran a nut on this bolt here, and I ran it all the way up flush, and I cut this bolt off about a quarter of an inch, where I still have some threads where it's going to tighten down. It'll tighten that metal pipe down to the head. It'll be plenty to tighten it down. And like I said, I took this one and I cut it off also. Don't forget, put your nut on there first, because if you cut this off, trying to focus, if you cut this off and then you try to thread a nut on there, it's not going to thread on. So if you put a nut on first, it'll thread off and it'll fix the threads it'll thread on. So that's my little tip with this pain in the butt bolt right here. And you need this bolt because you need this side for the ground. Let's see, I think it's this ground right here. Right there, that one goes to the back of that head. So now we got to torque it. And so I got my Milwaukee light here. It's going to help out. It's pretty nice. It slides. You can take it off. I just did a video with this, showing this tool today on my Tones Tools. So now let's get ready to torque these heads. I got Felpro head bolts, and the torque specs are different than the Ford specs. This requires you to oil the head of the bolt, use liquid thread sealant on the bolts that go into coolant passages, and the torque spec is different. So if you got aftermarket head bolts, make sure you follow your proper directions. So with the Felpro head bolts, even the sequence is different. As you can see right here, if you compare this to what I had earlier on the picture. So here's the Felpro torque specs. It's similar, just that I believe the torque is actually more. It's a little bit more. You want to make sure you can trust your torque wrench. So this is a snap-on Tech Angle long 1/2 inch torque wrench right here. I'm using this to torque it on the initial foot-pounds. So we're going to go to 32 foot-pounds. And next up, 95 degrees. Once the heads are on, it's time to do the timing. So one thing that I like to do is right now you see that you can easily see the block where the timing cover is going to ride, right? But once we put the chain on here, then we have less visibility. So what I personally like to do is I always clean my whole timing chain area and get everything ready where all it needs is a simple wipe, and then I do the timing chain. So once we get it clean, the first step is going to be to put the fixed guides on first. So this is what your cams are going to look like right there. So that's the passenger cam. That's the driver cam. That's where they should be. And then there's the crank sprocket. Here's a better view of what it looks like right here. The passenger cam almost should be straight up from the head. And then this one is a little more straight up at 12 o'clock. If you're using new chains, you'll notice that if you turn your chain like this and have your colored link there, all your links line up and you get to the bottom and your colored link is there. So the chain is the exact same length on both sides. So one thing I did to make things easier for me was I colored the links on the timing sprocket green. And then I colored the link on the chain pink, so that way easily I can see that it's lined up. So timing this engine is actually pretty simple. There's one thing, and this goes with any time you time an engine or put a head on, a cam on, whatever, is you need to make sure that your camshaft is close enough to where you need it to be. So like this button, this not the mark right here. Let's say the mark was way down here, and I had to turn the cam all the way. You take the potential for really forcing the valves upon the pistons if it's an interference engine. So you want it to be close. This one here was like right down here, and this one was like right there. So here's how I timed this engine. The first thing you'll need is a helper. Makes it really easy. So I have these Capri tools, long box end wrenches, and they're really thick and strong. So I took the 18, put it here, and I had to have a buddy help me with this. I could do it myself. There's ways to do it yourself with bungee cords and straps and all that other stuff, but I work in a very busy shop with a lot of guys. So there's always somebody that can usually help. So the first step is with your sprocket on. So what I did down here was I marked my crank sprocket with a green dot, and then I marked the bottom of the chains with a pink right there, so you can see that they line up. They line up on the same dot on the crank sprocket. So what you do is you put your chain down here, and then you roll it up here. You only have this fixed guide on. You bring the chain up through here, and you have to have the chain obviously on the cam side, and you have someone move the cam towards you, and you get your link on. Then you need to turn it towards the passenger side and take all the slop out of the fixed side. So then all your slop is here. But you also need to continue holding down here because your chain can still slip. From there, you're going to put your moving guide on. You're going to slide it on the pin here, and it's going to lay on the chain. You're going to take your bolts out, and you're going to slide your tensioner inside of the guide, because the guide has a channel on each side, and the tensioner goes inside. You slip your tensioner inside, and then your bolts easily thread in. Smash those in, pull your pin. This chain is done. You come to this side and do the exact same thing. The only difference is now your cam is down there, and you need to bring it this way. Same process, same procedure, same everything. It all worked the same, and now this engine is timed. Now you don't need to roll this engine over because we have colored links here, and the colored links line it up. Your timing chain tensioner is fed by oil, so everything is timed right now. You leave it just like it is. So the next step is going to be to put that bolt in back there for your water pipe. Come over here, make sure your transmission dipstick is installed in your transmission properly, and you're going to put the bolt in, bolting it up over here. Then we're going to get ready to put the timing cover on. As soon as you get your timing chains on and you've pulled your pins, the next thing that you want to do is you want to take your crank pickup, this big guy right here, and you want to put that on your crank. Now you want the teeth to be going in a forward direction, like that. Now this is what your crank sensor picks up off of. If you don't put this in, the engine won't start. I've had a couple times where this got misplaced when I was doing engines, and it didn't start when I got done. Now here's the torque specs one more time. The intake is going to have a different torque spec, so stay tuned for that torque spec, because it's not 89 inch-pounds. So a little disclaimer on the intake manifold torque. A lot of these Fords have already had the intake manifold replaced with an aftermarket intake because they're not available anymore. So you have to be careful because Ford's intake is torqued to 89 inch-pounds. However, the aftermarket ones are not torqued to 89 inch-pounds. So this is an aftermarket intake here, and the way you can tell is when you take your ignition coils out, there'll be screws. There'll be 7mm screws instead of 7mm bolts. They're screwed into plastic. So the torque spec is right there for this intake. It says 18 foot-pounds right there. So the thermostat housing and all the intake bolts are 18 foot-pounds. So you want to be careful of that. The other thing is, if you do have an aftermarket intake, the intake gaskets that come in the set are not going to work. You're going to need something like that. And this is a Dorman kit, well, because Dorman makes that manifold. So you want to make sure that you're that you get the right gasket kit, and also that you don't torque these coils down too tight. One more thing is this cap back there, that rubber cap. That's why I'm replacing. That's why I did head gaskets. So this is the second one I've seen where somebody got this intake and it has this cap on here and it has a piece of metal and it's twisted and it's supposed to hold it on. Well, it's not a clamp. Oh, I mean, it is a clamp, but it only clamps like one time. So it's not like a tightening clamp. So this cap pops off and then it blows the head gasket because it loses the coolant fast. This is the second one I've seen. First one they didn't fix. This one they did. So anyways, I put a new cap and a worm drive clamp on there because the Ford one, you can't get the Ford one anymore. So make sure that you make that adjustment when you're doing this job. If you get to this point and you have the dipstick, the engine oil dipstick in your hand, you made a big mistake. This actually has to go on with the head and exhaust manifold all together because you can't put it in. So now I have to pull the engine mount. I have to pull the engine mount off and then the exhaust manifold off completely just to get this dipstick in. Well, I hope after watching this video, you should feel pretty confident doing head gaskets on this, timing the engine. Even if you don't have new timing components, you marked your marks. As long as you line your marks up when you're done, you're good to go. Or you can find the colored links on the chain and line it up to the engine like I showed you. Usually you can still see the colored links. A lot of times they're still a different color. So thanks for watching the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content, which you definitely don't want to miss. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.